On the morning of October 26, 1863, in a muddy stretch of woodland near Chattanooga, Tennessee, a Union soldier named Ambrose Bierce pressed himself flat against the cold earth as a Confederate artillery shell screamed overhead and buried itself in the trunk of an oak tree, splitting it open like a rib cage. The air smelled of sulfur, black powder, and something metallic, the tang of blood and shrapnel mixing with damp soil. Around him, men were being torn apart, not by the ideas they fought over, not by the courage or cowardice of generals, but by iron. Iron cannonballs, iron bayonets, iron shrapnel casing. Iron railroad tracks had delivered the armies. Iron foundries had armed them, and iron plows had fed the nation whose future hung in the balance. In that single battle at Chattanooga, roughly 12,000 men fell, killed, wounded, or missing, and nearly every wound traced back, in one form or another, to shaped and sharpened iron. The metal did not care which side it struck. It never does.
That was 1863.
But the story of iron starts thousands of years before, in a place no army had yet marched, and no empire had yet risen to fall. Long before anyone learned to pull iron from the ground, it fell from the sky. Around 3200 BCE, in the arid expanses of what is now Egypt and Mesopotamia, ancient peoples encountered fragments of meteoritic iron. Dense, strange, silvery rocks embedded in craters or scattered across desert plains. The Egyptians had a name for it. They called it Jampt, which translates roughly to iron of heaven. And they were not wrong. These metallic lumps, rich in nickel and iron alloy, literally came from space. Archaeological digs confirmed that some of the earliest iron artifacts ever found, including a set of beads from a tomb at Gerseh, dating to around 3200 BCE, were hammered from meteorites. Not smelted, not forged in any furnace. Beaten cold with stone tools into small, precious ornaments that were buried with the dead, because iron from the sky was rarer than gold.
The first people to consistently crack this problem, according to most archaeological evidence,
were communities in Anatolia, modern-day Turkey, and parts of sub-Saharan Africa, working independently sometime between 1500 and 1200 BCE. The Hittites of Anatolia are often credited as early masters, but recent excavations in what is now Tanzania, Rwanda, and Cameroon have revealed iron smelting traditions that may be equally old, and in some cases, older. Carbon-14 dating of furnace remains in the Great Lakes region of Africa has pushed some smelting dates back to around 1400 BCE, possibly earlier. These African metallurgists developed preheating techniques for their furnaces, using tall, natural draft structures that produced carbon steel at temperatures European furnaces would not achieve for nearly 2,000 years. That is not a footnote. That is a fundamental rewriting of who understood what and when. The ingenuity was extraordinary. These were not people stumbling onto a discovery. They were engineers.
The technical detail that stuns modern metallurgists is this. Early African iron smelters used carefully designed clay furnaces, some shaped like tall chimneys, others partially buried, with tuyères, clay pipes, angled precisely to channel air into the combustion zone. The angle, diameter, and number of these pipes determined the temperature and carbon content of the resulting bloom. Adjust the airflow wrong, and you get useless slag. Adjust it right, and you get workable iron. sometimes with enough carbon to qualify as low-grade steel. This was empirical chemistry, performed without a single written formula, passed from master to apprentice across generations, refined over centuries. Iron changed everything it touched, and it touched the Hittites first in the written historical record. The Hittite Empire, centered in Anatolia from roughly 1600 to 1178 BCE, treated iron production as a state secret. According to one widely repeated account, the Hittite king Hattusili III wrote a letter to an Assyrian king, apologizing that he could not send the requested iron goods because his stockpiles were depleted. A diplomatic stall that historians interpret as evidence that the Hittites understood the strategic value of controlling the supply. They hoarded knowledge of smelting the way modern nations hoard nuclear technology. Iron weapons, harder, sharper, and more durable than bronze, gave whoever possessed them an asymmetric advantage on the battlefield.
When the Hittite Empire collapsed around 1178 BCE, part of the broader Bronze Age collapse that swept the eastern Mediterranean, the ironworking knowledge dispersed. Hittite smiths scattered into neighboring regions, Syria, Mesopotamia, the Levant, and iron smelting spread like a secret suddenly whispered to everyone at once. Within 2 centuries, iron had reached Greece, the Italian peninsula, and deep into the Middle East. This was the birth of the Iron Age, and it was not merely a change in tools, it was a change in power. Bronze required tin and copper, both relatively scarce and often controlled by long-distance trade routes. Iron ore, by contrast, was everywhere, abundant, democratic in a material sense. Any community with the knowledge to smelt it could arm itself, plow its own fields, and cut its own timber. The monopoly of Bronze Age elites began to crack. In the Indian subcontinent, iron took on a different character entirely. By roughly 300 BCE, smiths in southern India were producing what the world would later call Wootz steel, a crucible steel of extraordinary quality, with a distinctive, wavy, mottled pattern on its surface. The technique involved sealing iron ore, carbon material, and glass inside a clay crucible, then heating it for days until the iron absorbed precisely the right amount of carbon and impurities to form ultra-hard, ultra-sharp steel. Blades made from Wootz steel became legendary across the ancient world. Arab traders carried them to Damascus, where European Crusaders would later encounter them as Damascus steel, swords that, according to breathless accounts, could slice a floating silk scarf in midair. The technology behind Wootz remained an Indian secret for over 1,000 years. Not bad for smiths working with clay pots and charcoal. And then there is the Iron Pillar of Delhi, erected around 402 CE during the Gupta dynasty, standing over 7 meters tall and weighing more than 6 tons. It has stood outdoors, exposed to monsoon rains, for over 1,600 years, and it has barely rusted. Modern metallurgical analysis revealed that the pillar's iron contains an unusually high phosphorus content, which formed a thin protective layer of iron hydrogen phosphate on its surface, an accidental anti-corrosion technology that Western science would not understand until the 20th century. Think about that for a second. When iron knowledge reached medieval Europe, the reaction was not awe, it was suspicion. Early medieval European societies inherited Roman ironworking traditions, but the collapse of the Western Roman Empire in the 5th century had shattered supply chains, and iron became scarce, expensive, and poorly understood. Village blacksmiths, who worked iron at the forge with hammer and anvil, occupied an uneasy social position, necessary
but feared. The transformative act of turning dull stone into gleaming metal through fire looked, to many medieval minds, like something uncomfortably close to sorcery. Blacksmiths were associated with the devil in folk traditions across England, France, and the Germanic lands. Church records from the early medieval period describe debates over whether smithing was a godly or ungodly craft. In some communities, blacksmiths were forbidden from working on certain saints' days, not merely as a labor restriction, but because the act of forging was considered spiritually dangerous. This decision seemed small at the time. It was not. The superstition had real consequences. It slowed innovation. It kept ironworking techniques crude compared to what Indian and African metallurgists had achieved centuries earlier. European iron, for much of the medieval period, was of notably poor quality, brittle, inconsistent, and inferior to the steel being produced in Asia. When Crusaders encountered Damascus steel blades in the 12th century, they were genuinely shocked. According to one widely repeated account, a Crusader knight tested his European sword against a captured Saracen blade, and the European weapon chipped. The Crusaders' reaction was not scientific curiosity. It was religious terror. Some knights concluded that the Muslim swords must be enchanted. And no, that is not something anyone made up. It is recorded in multiple Crusader-era chronicles. The turning point for iron in Europe came not from a single genius, but from a machine and the desperate economics of war. In the late 14th and early 15th centuries, European metallurgists developed the blast furnace, likely influenced by Chinese technology that had existed since at least the 5th century BCE. The blast furnace used water-powered bellows to force enormous quantities of air into a tall stone chimney packed with iron ore, charcoal, and limestone. The result was cast iron, liquid iron that could be poured into molds. It was a revelation. Suddenly, iron could be produced in volume. Cannons, cannonballs, plowshares, nails, stoves, pots. The blast furnace spread from the Rhine Valley and the Low Countries outward across Europe, and by the mid-15th century, iron production had become an industry. But the figure who truly forged the modern Iron Age was a man most people have never heard of. Abraham Darby, a Quaker ironmaster from Coalbrookdale, Shropshire, England. In 1709, Darby achieved something that had eluded metallurgists for generations. He successfully smelted iron using coke, derived from coal, instead of charcoal, derived from wood. The significance cannot be overstated. Europe was running out of forests. Charcoal production had devoured woodlands across England, France, and Sweden. Iron production was hitting a ceiling imposed by the finite supply of trees. Darby's coke smelting process shattered that ceiling. Coal was abundant. Coal was cheap. And coal-fired iron was the foundation upon which the entire Industrial Revolution would be built. The clock was already ticking. The old world just could not hear it yet. Darby himself was a quiet man, deeply religious, more interested in pots and kettles than in fame. His first major commercial product was a thin-walled iron cooking pot, cheaper and lighter than anything previously available. It sold enormously well. But the real legacy was the method, not the pot. His grandson, Abraham Darby III, would use the same technology to build the iron bridge across the River Severn in 1779, the first major bridge in the world constructed entirely of cast iron, a structure so astonishing that people traveled from across Europe simply to stand on it and stare. Which, looking back,
was either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid, given that no one had any idea whether a bridge made of iron would hold. It held, and the world changed. The dark chapter of iron is not a single event. It is a system, a grinding, centuries-long engine of extraction and suffering that powered the industrial age. When European empires discovered that their colonial territories were rich in iron ore, they did what empires do. They took it. In India, the British East India Company systematically dismantled indigenous ironworking traditions, imposing tariffs and trade restrictions that made it cheaper for Indian communities to buy inferior British iron than to produce their own superior steel. The great Wootz steel tradition, which had produced the finest blades on Earth for over a millennium, was effectively destroyed by the early 19th century. Historians estimate that India's share of global manufacturing output fell from roughly 25% in 1800 to under 2% by 1900, and the suppression of indigenous metallurgy was a significant part of that collapse. In the Congo, the story was worse. When King Leopold II of Belgium claimed the Congo Free State as his personal property in 1885, the exploitation that followed extended to every extractable resource, iron among them. Forced labor, enforced by amputation, starvation, and murder, killed an estimated 10 million Congolese people between 1885 and 1908, according to widely cited demographic analyses. Leopold himself never visited the Congo. He administered its destruction from a palace in Brussels. When pressed on the atrocities, he reportedly said, "I do not want to risk either Belgium's revenues or my own." The iron and rubber extracted from the Congo built Belgian railways and Belgian fortunes. The cost was measured in severed hands and unmarked graves. In the American South, enslaved people were central to the iron industry long before the Civil War. The Tredegar Iron Works in Richmond, Virginia, one of the largest iron producers in the antebellum United States, relied heavily on enslaved labor. Enslaved men worked the blast furnaces, the rolling mills, and the forges, enduring temperatures that blistered skin and air thick with metallite dust that scarred lungs. When the Confederacy went to war in 1861, Tredegar became its primary arms manufacturer, and enslaved workers were forced to produce the very weapons used to defend the system that enslaved them. After the war, many of those same workers were hired back at subsistence wages under conditions barely distinguishable from bondage. The iron they had forged with their bodies helped build the railroad network that stitched together the nation that had brutalized them, a nation whose industrial might rested on a foundation they were never credited for building. That reshuffling, the Great Migration, the rise of industrial cities like Pittsburgh, Birmingham, and Gary drew millions of Black Americans northward in the 20th century, chasing iron and steel jobs, remaking the demographic map of the United States in ways that persist to this day. Iron's global spread in the modern era is staggering in its scale. China, which had pioneered cast iron production by the 5th century BCE, over 1,000 years before Europe managed it, now produces roughly 1 billion metric tons of crude steel per year, accounting for more than half the world's total output. I mean, think about that for a second. One country producing more steel than the rest of the planet combined. Brazil mines iron ore from the Carajas region in the Amazon, the largest iron ore deposit ever discovered, and ships it across the Atlantic in bulk carriers so enormous they are called Veilmax ships, each one carrying 400,000 tons of raw ore. Australia's Pilbara region produces another vast share, with iron ore mines visible from space. Japan, which has almost no domestic iron ore, built one of the world's most advanced steel industries by importing raw materials and perfecting the refining process, a strategy that transformed a resource-poor island nation into an industrial superpower.
The uses of iron extend far beyond what most people imagine. Yes, it builds bridges, skyscrapers, cars, and ships. But iron oxide, rust, is one of the most widely used pigments on Earth, responsible for the red and ochre tones in paints, cosmetics, and even food coloring. Ferric chloride is used in water purification systems that serve billions of people. Iron nanoparticles are being used in experimental cancer treatments, injected into tumors and then activated by magnetic fields to generate heat that destroys malignant cells. And every single human being alive carries iron in their blood, roughly 3 to 4 grams of it, bound to hemoglobin, carrying oxygen from lung to cell to keep the body alive. The metal that forged swords and empires also keeps hearts beating. If someone from that Anatolian forge 3,000 years ago could see a modern steel mill, the rivers of molten metal, the robotic arms, the production lines turning out 5,000 tons of steel in a single day, they would not recognize it as ironworking. But if they touched the cooling metal, felt its weight, watched it glow orange and then fade to silver gray, they would know. They would know it in their hands. It is the same substance, the same stubborn, heavy, miraculous element. Number 26 on the periodic table, born in the cores of dying stars and scattered across the universe in supernova explosions billions of years before the Earth even formed. Every atom of iron on this planet is older than the sun. Iron started as strange silvery rocks falling from the sky, mysterious and rare. Ancient Egyptians spent centuries venerating it as heaven's gift. Hittite kings built an empire on the secret of smelting it. Indian metallurgists forged steel so fine it would not be matched for 1,000 years. African engineers designed furnaces that outperformed European technology by millennia. Europeans feared it, fumbled with it, and then, once they understood it, used it to conquer and exploit half the world. Abraham Darby unlocked it from the tyranny of charcoal, and it erupted into the Industrial Revolution. It survived its own weaponization, endured the horrors committed in its name, and went on to become the skeleton of every city on Earth, the lifeblood in every human vein. Not bad for a dull rock pulled from the dirt. Every bridge you cross, every building you enter, every breath your blood carries to your brain, iron is there, silent and essential, holding the modern world together the way it has held civilizations together for 3,000 years. It is a monument to human brilliance and a record of human cruelty, fused into a single element that does not judge, does not forget, and does not rust away as quickly as the people who shaped it. If you enjoyed this, hit subscribe and drop a comment telling us which part of iron's history surprised you the most. And make sure to like this video so more people can find it.